Can you see my screen?
Yes.
It's still black. Oh, and there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just switch it to full screen. There you go. Okay, great. So hello everyone. It's nice to see you all faces again. Just like Bada said, my name is Faisal. I was mostly looking after Jordan the past year. For today's session or week 6 session, we'll be looking at, generally about fundraising for your startups. So mostly we're looking at, the aspects and the stages of different stages of startups, the things that you should be looking at or should be looking for during or pre-fundraising, other than, the technical evaluation and how to evaluate your company. And for that, also for any technical questions that are related in different valuation models, I think just like what Better said, would be helpful for you to attend tomorrow's session, since it's being delivered by a VC. Mostly they would be looking at companies, or would be funding also companies at your stage. All right. Just before going through our session and recapping from last conversation or the first conversation I had with you guys, and I heard many of you that either works in as a financial advisor or the financial sector. So my question to you is: have you fundraised before in your previous idea? So I tend generally to keep my session interactive, so just feel free to jump in and just add of it. And Hitan, so what was your experience, if you mind sharing? Of course, generally, it's very difficult, especially if it's your first time or second.
Yeah, it was my first time, and I raised $50,000. That was back in 2012 for my first startup called Dukkan. Well, it was pretty easy because we were part of the first startup weekend in Bahrain at that time, and then we were the second runner-up. And from the second idea, the first idea was more like a charity thing. Second one was something like a YouTube channel for students, and the third one was ours, which was building a QR code-based payment system, which is very popular, like Benefit Pay. I think it was one of a kind at that time, and nobody had thought of that. And I think that made it extremely easy for us to access investors.
Okay.
And
So you seeked an investor, as
basically it was the investor. It was the investor who reached out to us, and then we had a meeting with them, and we were part of their evaluation. And there were certain criteria, and we went through that. It was pretty smooth. The team was good. We were 5 people involved, and everybody was from different domain, mostly IT with project management, business development.
Anyone else? Oh, sorry.
It was good. Yeah. No, that was it. I mean, we managed to get. I don't remember most of the details, but it was easy. It wasn't that difficult.
Okay. Anyone else? No taker.
We raised. I was part of Plastics Labs accelerator program.
Okay.
To be honest, like it was my first time. Like I'm still new to the whole tech industry, startup industry, and stuff. Hence my background.
Great. Okay.
And yeah. And as a start, I think, I'll just say that it's just a matter of having a good idea that solves an actual problem. With it being said, it has to make sense. That's the whole thing. Like I would say, it has to make sense, and it actually solves a problem. And yeah, like you believe in it. You have the channels like you guys and other accelerator programs that kind of open opportunities for people like me, and just frame something proper and solid and go ahead with it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for your input and feedback, and that's something, both of the topics that you mentioned would be getting into, especially one, selecting strategically who you partner with. The second part is the stages and difficulties and the things that you should be looking at at a conception or pre-MVP, post-MVP stage seed startup. All right. So before getting into it, one thing that I always like to talk about, which is the fundraising philosophy. As an entrepreneur, and as a startup, and when you should, the question is when you should be looking at fundraising. As an entrepreneur, you should fundraise when you have proof of concept and validation of a need for your product and whatever market you'll be targeting. And usually at an early stage or an idea stage, you would bootstrap you would bootstrap your startup idea. Mainly either by your personal savings, or you look at the 3 Fs, which are the friends, families, and the third F, and what I like to call them, fools. And also, looking at the amount that you should be raising is that literally can, have your startup up and running for the next 12 to 18 months, or maybe also for 2 years, for your next evaluation. What also you should be considering is really seeking the exact amount that you need, and not seeking multiple investments at an early stage, as you don't want to diminish your shares and equity at a very early stage, which we'll also be talking about why you shouldn't be doing that. Sorry, if you have any questions, just let me know. So in this session, we'll be mostly looking at, or for this segment, we'll be talking about the pre-funding. Establishing a successful business, it is very rewarding, but also at the same time, it's long, it's pain, and the process is quite painful. And what makes it mostly difficult, especially at this stage, is limited access to funding and funding itself. However, I do believe as an entrepreneur, it's very vital for you to understand the external financing is not usually a necessity at an early stage or at a ideation stage. But here are 3 or main things that I think you should be looking at or the steps you should be looking at before funding. So the first thing, and most of them, I think you've gone through in previous sessions, and I'm mostly we'd be looking at several other main points that will, but mostly looking at assessing the requirements and really operationalizing your idea. So the first thing, and most of these topics, and the reason why I'm not going to every detail of them, most of these topics you have already covered them in previous sessions. So one thing you should be looking at is you need to evaluate your chances. Is how can you ensure your idea has enough market potential and it generates revenues and can survive market volatility. You really need to look at evaluation of the chances it might have of this happening and the risks that they pose to your ideas and businesses. It is recommended at this stage or an early stage that you scope around and look around for your existing competitors in the markets, could be local or international, that offer a similar product or idea that you have. What really great about these successful companies, and here's a tip towards, they always like to brag about the journey that they've gone through, whether from funding, from getting the right regulations and the business licenses that you need. So you can always learn and from these steps and ideas, or learn from their journey, and could be quite a handful of ideas for you that you can come up. And also could be a shortcut, right? Because what you're doing is really learning, one, the difficulty of the market, the second thing, the requirements to enter and establish legally and a legal business entity that is up and running. Sorry. The second part is you assess the requirement. We already talked about that. So the second thing is, how can you ensure so this is how you can assess the requirements, and here's some questions that you really should be thinking about as you move forward in the market, or before you even start your idea. So how much financing you need, and the source of it. Would you require to bootstrap? And if you cannot bootstrap it, how could you be able to obtain finances? Your time is quite crucial. So the second question you should be asking yourself before starting the idea is, how much time do you need to work on it? Is it can be done part-time, or do you need to quit your job and focus on it full-time? Is that also can be justified as well by the existing amount of money that you have that you got it bootstrapped as well? The third question is, what are your targets and how soon you can reach them before abandoning the process? Like I said, at the initial stage and seed stage are the longest and the most difficult stages you are as a startup and trying to run your business. So you should really be thinking about putting down a proper timeline and going forward, and also a contingency plan. And then if both plans failed, what are your options of not necessarily abandoning your idea, but also how you can pivot and come up with a new idea and turn it around. The third or the fourth question is, so if bootstrapping is there, but your time is still crucial and you cannot give up your full-time job for it, who would you require? Would you require to have a co-founder team who could initially be friends, not necessarily industry experts and hiring a full-timer, but who from your friends and family and from your network that can support you in running the idea? Or at the initial stages, can you run it on your own? And that also all, in the end, you'll find out that these kind of questions that you do not necessarily need to have an answer for, but at least a rough answer, would also take part in valuation or evaluating your company and supporting you in the fundraise. The last bit, which I also mentioned in the above, how you can kind of learn by assessing your competitors and looking at them and what they do, is what are the legal issues that you need to watch out for from structuring your business all the way from minor bits from the general client complaints or any business activities that requires pre-approval before offering them to the market. So these are 5 main, I think, not necessarily not necessarily written down as a mandatory questions, but 5 main questions I would say I would recommend people to consider or an entrepreneur to consider before going ahead with their startup.
I think just one thing, I think it's kind of relevant, is if you're talking about should I be going full time or not, right? And I think that's, different people are at different stages, I guess, in their career and different stages at their kind of life cycle within the startup. And I think one way that I kind of like to ask when you ask, should I quit my job or not, is typically if you're at a stage when you're looking for, a second kind of round of funding or a proper seed round or or VC money for sure, right? You have to be full time to be able to get to that, and all VCs will make it mandatory for you to be working full time on this. There's no question about that, right? But the question is earlier on when you're just starting up your kind of startup, to ask yourself, how much work is going to be required at this stage? Do I have enough free time to do it myself, right? And then there's also, a cost kind of benefit to this. Is it detrimental to my company's success by burning through my cash reserves and quitting my job? Or is it beneficial for myself, for me to, if you're on a better kind of pay raise or pay scale or whatever, to hire somebody at a at a lower level to remove some of your kind of time burden and so on, and then focus and spend your free time to build your company and use the money that you're earning in your current employment to kind of fund the project until it's at a better stage.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, brother. So if you determine that there's a potential and when you assess your requirements, assess your requirements and you find that your product is valid for the market and you can attract clients and customers, you move on to the next stage, which you prepare for the fundraise. And besides knowing your valuation of your startup, and the various funding modules that are available for you, and how you based your financials and projections for future growth. Most likely at an early stage, there are many other aspects an investor would be looking at your business and yourself as an entrepreneur, that are that are quite crucial, and you're definitely going to need to have them along your journey, such as and mostly at least what the key I think mostly the key ones are networking, and as you would require to have the network, to plug in or reach out to people for and offer them your solution, your product. The founding team is also needs to be having, as a founder of your business, you need to be well-rounded around the whole offer, but you also need to back it with your existing experiences, whether on professional level, or whom you are, and the talent and the spirit and the passion that you have. So mostly, as an investor, would always look at the talent of an idea. As many ideas, as an idea itself, it's not quite unique. So ideas generally, it's there in the market, and many people have thought about it. But what really we'll be looking at is, the people that are running it, the talent behind it, who are the founders, the entrepreneurs, who are the people who will be managing and scaling the company from an early stage. So the founding team is also quite crucial to have. The third thing, which is also preferable and also determines, the size of your company and more towards the corporate governance side of things, is the legal registration of your company. Besides, it is required to have a legal establishing entity and running entity to be funded in and to receive money. But it's also, determined on a corporate governance side of things on how to structure board, the legal holding into the legal name of, whether if it's a WLL or a holding company or an SPC. It's also very much, I'd say, important for you to know and structure. The fourth thing is pivoting. Not always an idea it's always successful. You always need to think about, just in case, on how to pivot and generate another idea that can be involved, or to improve your idea and value for your proposition. I think the fifth part is bootstrapping. Again, this is more about, really scaling your company or moving your idea from an ideation stage to an MVP.
Yeah. So, I mean, fundamentally, what you're looking at, right, is, do you have the basics kind of set in place to be able to start and launch your company? Do you have enough kind of cash reserves to kind of get you at least going? Have you, when we say pivoting, you're talking about, am I pointed in the right direction with my company? Are there refinements before I need to kind of build it? And typically that happens when you start talking to users. The legal aspect, you're talking mostly about, not just about registration and whatever, but, at a later stage, something that you kind of need to keep in mind is that in the future, when you get formal funding, your company structure is likely to change. And in many cases, especially in this region, they ask you to open up an account in either like the BVI or in Delaware or one of these other kind of offshore companies, because the structure is just generally more appealing to VCs and formal funding, so on. And then, that when we're talking about the founding team, it's a lot of it is about when somebody wants to invest into a company, they invest into a company, not into necessarily just an individual, right? And so you have to also prove that you're diverse enough and strong enough that, if something happened to one of the founders or it happened to the founder, that there are other people that can kind of pick up and continue, and they won't necessarily lose their investment flat out. And I think just one last thing is just, whenever you're fundraising, the reason why networking is really important is, at the end of the day, people invest in people, not necessarily always just companies into companies. And so you have to maintain a good relationship with all of the potential investors as well. And this doesn't mean, like, it helps a lot when throughout the journey, as you're building your company, you keep some level of contact and updating to investors about your progress and how you're growing, what you're doing, so that when the time comes for you to start fundraising and when you're looking to get a proper fund, that you're actually prepared to take that investment on. Yeah,
Absolutely. So let's say you figured out the pre-funding and then you're ready at a funding stage, or you are ready to raise funds. I think one main thing to look at is to look at your options, which is not necessarily just looking for equity and raising fund, but also looking at an alternative of financing methods, just like grants, debt, or mezzanine investments, and even impact investing, which we'll be getting to as in what are they and the benefits of them in a bit. So for grants, it's usually given by either a financial or non-financial institute, usually more on an organizational level. So you can find these in just like likes of the UN, the World Banks, or any agency that looks after creating an impact on the local society or their jurisdiction. It comes, and also, sorry, just to add on that, and also one more thing that's come to it, it's also can be part of a CSR within a financial institution. So for example, running a program that also comes in an award, and that program at the end you would receive an award in a financial matter. That would be considered a grant or a gift as well.
Which basically what I was saying is, you guys are all basically
exactly. And just like the ones that you see with programs or funding bodies, just like Tamkeen, our labor funds program last year, BDB also had ones prior to that. And these are mostly formed in a competition base, but also comes with benefits. Although it seems, so one thing I think of it is it's free of charge. They're not taking a stake, or you would be financially liable to pay them back as well. There is no financial commitments or payback requirements. I think the second advantage in it is they wouldn't have influence on your day-to-day operations and how to run and scale and manage. So there won't be any kind of interferences by the funding body. But also and furthermore to that, of course, is just part of you being in the program that provides the grant, will get you the marketing that you need. And these are all would be considered an indirect impacts. The reach out to the investors and, the networking that you would have as you go through the program. So that's the third, fourth point for you guys, that not necessarily financial related impact or an advantage, but it is quite good to have and to take part in these programs. On the downside of things, usually such awards are smaller in price or amount. Usually it also would require you to have for some grants would have reporting requirements as you move forward, sharing on. So if it's more of an RFP kind of grant, it would require you to disclose on how you plan to disperse the money and the reporting basis. Is it quarterly, monthly, and many stringent eligibilities and extensive requirements. It's mostly for the larger grants, it is dispersed in stages, and that's based on your financial timeline. So based on how you structure the stages of spending, and that's how you would receive it. And for the smaller ones, for the competition-based one, it's giving it as a one-time fee. Again, it requires, the form of grant does not come as easy as knock on the door and receive the money. So it's either in a form of competition, it's either a form of an RFP or request for, or kind of, a project that you need to build a proposal for. at an early stage of startup, it's, it's can be quite difficult for them to apply for the latter part, for the RFP part, for the RFP based grants. So again, it could be quite difficult because they would be asking you for your previous experiences. Again, it's for all parts of the lengthy requirements that grants require. The second form is debt financing. That the main point of it, or the key advantage, I'd say, is you avoid giving up equity. You don't onboard stakeholders with you. You don't have, they will not take a share of equity, and you're completely control on your financials and how to navigate through them and disperse or what not, and your revenues, of course, and profit. That's I think I'll highlight it as a main point of seeking debt financing. The disadvantage for it to be, again, and it's quite, it would be expensive to pay back, and it would prevent you, it could be difficult for you if you face a rough patch in your project or within your timeline as you grow. The initial due diligence also process prior to seeking debt is quite difficult, especially for an early stage startups, as they would seek, for collaterals, guarantees, or guarantors in that case, and someone to back you up. So at an early stage, I think as at a seed or even at an ideation, I wouldn't recommend seeking debt financing. The favorable part and mostly common is equity-based financing that come in form of having stakeholders or shareholders and people. You'd be having shareholders with you on board and investing anyone that invests in you. So I think the key advantage in it is unlike debt, you're not required to make cash repayments which could be monthly. You would also have a supportive investors. This is more strategic, and we'll look at it in a bit on also the difference in deciding on supporting you on your day-to-day operations and really scaling the company, and why it is more favorable to have seeking equity financing as an alternative to any other forms at this stage. The fourth part is the mezzanine, which is also in a similar but quite unique than convertible notes. It offers a flexibility for both lenders and borrowers, and in some scenarios it is favorable because it provides a mix of debt and equity. Borrowers would also at the end, or for borrowers, it's bit favorable for us because you would have quicker access to cash in both forms. And downside of it, I'd say, it can be very expensive, and structuring it is very complicated and would have to be done through third-party entities. Third parties would have to interfere, or in some cases at least, from what I experienced and understood. You would, again, structuring it is completely difficult because you're looking at converting from equity to debt and vice versa. It depends on the option that is available. And also, always be, and the scarcity of it in the market. That's another thing that you also need to understand, that is not quite available in the market, or at least in our region at this stage. Especially for a ideation or a growth stage and a seed stage startup. The last bit or the last part, as in different type of investments or funds, are impact investing. This is traditionally more, it's more broad and it's not necessarily I think specific focus on a certain sector or vertical. It's quite, can be made across different asset classes. Many businesses, in fact, are impact investors, or as in your startup idea. Impact investors usually would look at targeting a certain case within a jurisdiction, whether if it's financial inclusion, your idea supports, the minority, as in, and the common cases you'll find is access to finance, and digitizing financial transactions and looking at the unbanked and underserved and minorities. This is the very common case of impact investors funding a project. Usually it is a longer term when it comes to maturity. It's not the usual 10 plus 2 years in a VC. This is more a longer term in relationship that's looking at the 12 plus 10 years. And it's the one downside of it, and is you will not be able to measure growth or targets according to occasion and more costly detailed standards or specific metrics, and that's something you should be looking at. And that's for impact investment. And if I have any questions to that, I'll be more than happy to share about it. But I really want to get going and the rest of the sessions, because at this point, impact investing also is quite scarce, or impact investors are quite scarce in our region. But your idea would be considered as can be impactful, as in targeting the society and benefiting from it.
So hello, Mr. Faisal.
Yeah.
So which one, according to you, is the best one?
I think at an early stage, looking at different, so you will go further down the slides, we'll be looking at, the sizes or the stages of the companies and the preferred, I'd say at your startup idea, and then at the right stage, what kind of funds you'll be looking at. But let's say at a seed or an ideation stage, it's always common that the business is bootstrapped, meaning either your personal savings or the 3 Fs, which is friends, families, and fools. And then we'll go at from where you can find it. So we'll answer. So then you'll be looking at, so if it's bootstrapped, and then you would seek at an early stage, you'll be looking at an equity, either that is an angel investor or an early stage VC. That also can be a grant from an accelerator program, including this. So the grant you'd receive can also be somewhat of a fund to run your business or support launching your business.
I think it's a good deal to have swing between grant and equity, because the others, especially the debt and the mezzanine, is not that good. Grant and equity, in my opinion, because you just lose a little bit of your equity, and then
So here's a table that I put, showing the comparisons and difference of the different financing instruments that you have. So if you look at grants, like I said previously, it mostly comes from donors and could be national and international foundations. It can also be a CSR initiative from a private sector, or it could be from a crowdfunding platform, which we started seeing recently becoming very common in Saudi and UAE. Again, it has no acquisition of ownership. It's the cost of financing it is relatively low. The funder would face no financial risks, therefore will not interfere in your day-to-day operations. Because again, it's a form of giving you a grant, which is also can be considered a gift for a good cause, or to create impact in the society. And at the same time, would also not be considered a risk to them, as the money they would be giving would be dispersed as initiative, but also they will not be expecting no financial returns. And then that's again justifying the no interference in your day-to-day operations. From the support wise, it really depends, but relatively it depends on the grants, whether if it's from a competition or accelerator. Of course, parts of the cohort, they will be support and guiding you on how to, for example, this program. You have received ongoing support, and as you graduate from the accelerator program, you will still be involved in the networking and the marketing and everything that comes with it, and part of the ecosystem, of course. So that would be considered a high support. For some would be low, as in you win a competition, you get your money. For others, or funding bodies would also be considered medium as well from time to time. Depends on the case. For the bigger grants and the larger chunks of grants, your money is mostly restricted. As I mentioned before, you will not be able, you would have to provide a detailed timeline of the financial injections you require and the sum of each injection, including justified and detailed plan on how you're planning on dispersing. So on how to use the money. So it really depends from who you get the grant and the size of the grant, of course. For debt financing, mostly common for a seed, an ideation stage would be seeking a microfinance and going to the microfinance institutions, Abda Bank, Bahrain Development Bank, and such. You can also find it in development funds and private lending. Again, it would be a liability on you. You would have to make monthly payment at a certain interest rate, considering the stage of the startup and at a stage where you're not necessarily making revenue. Would you consider taking such liability? That's a question for you. From our end, we wouldn't recommend seeking debt finance at this stage. For equity, again, that's many various forms, from angel investors, VC firms, private equity funds, crowdfunding platforms as well can also play or specifically equity crowdfunding platforms. These are the funders. Yes, there is acquisition of ownership. It has medium cost of financing, usually related to structuring the business or structuring the company, meeting the requirements and comply to the requirements of the funding body. When it comes to the support, and that's a great thing also for at an early stage startup, is you do receive guidance and support from these funding bodies. Because on the other hand, it's a win-win situation. They want to achieve a win-win situation from them, where they gain very good returns from their early stage investment. The more money you make as a startup, the more money they make. So they would ensure for you to scale and grow and connect you to the market. And that's why we would also recommend equity-based investments. And again, and back to that answer as well. For mezzanine, because like I said, it's quite rare to have in this market, but it's good to realize or to know that they exist as you want to scale, let's say, hopefully to new markets. Mezzanine finance could be a way for you to secure a strategic market entry, whereby a preserved investor would not necessarily go with a high risk, especially for market entry companies. So you can, of course, structure something that is, at the initial stage, it's a debt. You'd receive the initial investment and pay back, and then once you establish and will secure or get skin in the game or skin in the market, you can convert that to equity. Again, it's very flexible. It's the use of money is unrestricted because it helps you to grow. But again, it's a very interesting topic, the mezzanine, and I'd recommend to have a read about it and understand more towards the mezzanine and convertible notes. And plus, that could be a good question for you to prepare for tomorrow's session with the VC. So we went over the pre-funding requirements and the stages and assessing at the initial stages and identified, let's say, the alternative or the financing methods that you have. Let's really look at, raising capitals. Let's look at the stages of the startups, and at each stage, what are the funding needs? And we'll be looking also at stage evaluation tools, the funding sources evaluation tools, and the methods of startup evaluations. And those really I would consider for you, and encourage every one of you to have a think about, look at and also understand it is how can you, or what's the best and that also answers the initial question that I got. So when we look at on both on the Y and X axis is when you have the revenue and time. We are right now, so some of you is at either a seed stage or at an ideation stage, I'd say. Judging on the timeline, those two stages are longer than the early growth, and then all the way to entering public markets and raising funds through secondary offerings. These are the initial stage. So if you look at it now, we'll go through it each one. So you have here the stages of the business. Over here at the top, I'm just, identifying each point what it is. These are at each stage and the source of finance or fund you can seek, and from whom basically. So at the conception to stage, it could be, from incubators, and it could be from bootstrapping, from the 3 Fs. At this stage would be angel investors and accelerator programs. It can also, throughout the whole timeline, can be grant, crowdfunding, and debt. And again, it's based on your availability. So once you pass the ideation stage, where the money you have been generating zero revenue, and just building your idea. And the red line over here, let's say this is the growth or the growth stage or the growth journey of a successful business. The most crucial stage is your seed stage. And you notice that the red line is negative revenue. So this is where you're mostly spending your money on developing your product, hiring the team. You are validating the product in the market and testing it. So mostly this is where you be just spending money. At the end stage and before entering a new stage, and this is what I call the negative line. This is what I call the valley of death. This is where your idea can make it or break it, and really purely determined on your endurance as an entrepreneur with all the ups and downs that you will go through in this stage. And it is long, and we all got to admit this is the longest stage for you as scaling your business. As you move forward in time, you would reach, and once you reach the break even, this is when you started earning revenue and start covering for your losses. This is where you also feel that you need your product has been validated in the market, and you need to scale that and get to originate more clients and making revenue. So this could be a good idea for you to start looking at raising funds for the next stage of your growth, which is an early growth. That is form of a pre-Series A or a Series A, and then we'll get further below. We'll get to the point of how can you identify the size of fund in each series and what does it really mean. And then really looking at scaling it all the way to growth, where you start to reinvest your revenue into creating new products, new schemes, and really generate more growth, and all the way to the end where you enter the public market and you start offering shares to the public. Any questions on that, in this one? I hope it's clear. Okay, cool.
It's clear, yes.
So let's evaluate your stage of business, right? So usually I would say this table can clearly meet or identifies each stage in based on what you currently have. If you're generating usually an ideation stage, you'd be generating zero revenue. Your product could be only an idea or progress to develop one. As your team, you would have 1 to 2 founding team co-founders. That would be hiring interns, hiring part-timers, and that's the current size of the team, which is usually it's 1 to 5 or less, even less than a 5, or the founder on his own. On an executive level, it would be the founder, the owner of the idea, and for your growth, and for you to grow to the next stage, you need to have your idea validated. That's through the research you'll be conducting. That would be through developing an alpha or beta or in a beta stage of your idea. That is, if it's a program or software. You would not have established a legal entity, and you don't have a board of directors yet and shareholders on board. At a seed stage, you would start slowly generating revenue that could be somewhat identified as inconsistent. that would be, having either through getting one client a month, or having a low number of users of your application or program. You're still at an MVP stage, and your product is still, and you're still pivoting in your idea. You're still updating, upgrading, enhancing, adding many offers, or cutting down on services that your idea provides. At the seed stage, of course, you would have 2 to 4 team members, or you would hire team members to support you to grow your idea. So again, dedicated full-time staff. Your executive team, at this stage, would have the founders plus 1 to 5 employees that sit on executive level, but also can be part of the co-founding team. Your growth part for the next stage would be, getting the customer validation and beginning to grow. This is where you get the clients and establish your entity. You're very, very well legally established, registered, and have approved to run your business. And again, your board of directors would be consisting of the co-founders and the investors that you onboard. At an early growth, you're making significant revenue. Your product is, you have reached product market fit, and this would be your last chance to, completely valid, or this is your go-to product. That's it. Everyone knows about it. I think at the early growth stage, I think there would be very low chances for you to, scratch and go back to the board and write down the idea. Your idea has to be ready for the next stages. You have hired a team, and you are noticing an accelerating growth. At a growth stage, this is when you'll be looking at everything's developed, your company systems are in place, and you're ready to secure more strategic investments and exit the previous ones. As of funding needs for your startups, so usually at an ideation stage, your initial savings are coming from your personal savings. So your initial funds are coming from personal savings, grants, equity finances. You would often spend, usually less than 150K on the business. Any more than that, of course, you would have to seek alternative financing methods. Your focus of fund really would be looking at, you're at the stage where you want and require to develop your prototype and hire critical team members. A seed stage, this is where I'd be looking at the equity financing, which is mostly favorable at anywhere ranges all the way up to 2 million. And that's something we have noticed before in many businesses. And just recently, if you heard about Tarabut Gateway, they closed their seed at $14 million, I think. But again, it always goes back on the idea or the pre-requirements or the pre-essential things that you need to be aware of your business, other than the company valuation, which is the founding members, the idea, your legal setup and registration, and your network, of course. Your focus of funding mostly will be funding on the product development and the marketing, the expansion, the hiring. And the same goes for early growth, where again, your typical range, funding range would be a Series A and above, which is starting from 1 million all the way to 30. And that's where you'll be starting looking at your source of fund would be a bit more strategic. These are the VCs and the angel investors, but also can be private equity firms that looks at early growth stages. And this is where you're growing your customer base, and again, more focusing on the growth. To some at this stage would also start looking at market expansions and entering new jurisdictions. So I think just reaching around to the last bit. So here's some questions, or just going back to the above. This is really for you to to understand, or to if it deemed to be, to title your business at which stage. But also here's another, I think, evaluation tool that you can really looking at, or based on what's been shared above, what are the best ways to move forward and which kind of financing or funding sources you should seek. So if you are at a ideation stage and you're willing to give up equity, accelerators, incubators is a way for you to go forward. To some from your family, friends, and from the 3 Fs, I'd say, you would also enter with them, or instead of just easily paying them back, you can alternatively offer them some equity with them. And because the relationship, the nature of relationships with the 3 Fs that you have, especially with friends and family, it's quite dynamic. It's very strong and close to your heart. So even to them, and they, of course, they would hopefully want to support you. So you can structure with them in a way of, either you offer them equity in return, or you just eventually would pay them back. You will pay them back in the end. If you're not willing to give up equity, of course, you can always go back to your savings. You can apply for a grant or start joining these competitions that can support you, or you can seek a startup loan. And again, the startup loan you can get from the banks and the microfinancers. So if you think that you're not at an ideation stage and you're at the seed stage, you would really be looking at, if you're willing to give up equity on the accelerators, incubators, the angel investors, and the crowdfunding and VCs. And if not, again, you always have your debt and alternate debt financing methods through bootstraps, grants, and the startup loans and the 3 Fs. At equity and growth stage, of course, things gets your methods of seeking funds becomes more strategic, and you'd have, I think, of course, you would have more options, I'd say, that are preferred. So in case if you're willing to give up equity, and at this stage it's recommended as well, you would look at banks, microfinance loans, bank overdrafts, and mezzanine financing. Oh, sorry, there's a minor mistake I just noticed. Here should be yes, and here is a no. So if you're willing to give up, actually, you would look at the angel investments and the VCs and mezzanine financing. And if not, then of course you can seek the alternative debt financing methods. For growth stage, I think it's also quite the same, but one good thing about it, or one additional way to give up equity is at the IPO stage. This is where you start looking at secondary offering and entering public markets. Again, which is quite difficult and hard, and it has its own requirements, including reaching a specific amount of revenue, years of the company, and progressing. And you rarely see companies at an early stage enter that. But hey, that's why we have NASDAQ as well. So many of them get listed in NASDAQ. So I tried to keep it short, but also straightforward, as in really for you to broaden your understanding of different stages of startup and what's out there. I hope also tomorrow's session will be more on your valuations and what really VCs look at in startups. From my end, I did reach to the end of my presentation slides. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Faisal, for that. I don't know, again, if anybody has any questions, you can either reach out now or we can ask privately, directly to Faisal.
Thank you, Faisal. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, Faisal.